Taiwan's Foreign Minister Lin Jialong just returned from a trip to Tuvalu, which is one of Taiwan's 3 diplomatic allies in the Pacific. I'm wondering how Taiwan is doing in your assessment in maintaining those relations, and what do you see this is the state of those ties with its remaining 3 diplomatic allies in the region?
You know, there's a lot of focus on the official diplomatic relationships, and in the Pacific there's only 3 with Taiwan. I think that's important. I'm a diplomat. I care about things like official recognition, but also, maybe even more important, is Taiwan's relationships with the other Pacific islands, the ones that don't have official diplomatic ties to Taipei. And what people forget, or perhaps overlook sometimes, and yet really should be prioritized, is that those connections matter too, even if they're unofficial. And Taiwan's reputation, its brand, you know, Taiwan helps, really does matter. And so Taiwan's area of expertise, medical, maritime, Coast Guard, capacity building, infrastructure, technology, even without diplomatic relations, those sort of partnerships with Pacific Islands really will benefit both sides, I think. And so while, yes, the foreign minister was just in Tuvalu, and that matters, of course, but I don't keep score in terms of 3 countries in the Pacific, 12 countries total recognize Taiwan officially. What I'm much more impressed by and focused on are all of those other relationships, because they matter too, and I would probably say matter maybe more, because you want that widespread, you know, understanding of Taiwan's situation, appreciation of all that Taiwan does for the good of the region.
Can you talk a little bit more about how Taiwan will benefit from, I guess, increasing its partnerships with countries that it doesn't have diplomatic relations with?
Well, you know, Taiwan is excluded from a number of international organizations. You know, it was excluded from the last Pacific Island Forum meeting, for example. But having friends in the room who can speak, you know, to remind these organizations that Taiwan matters, even if they're not actually present in the room. To have countries that have a relationship with other countries, principally the People's Republic of China, and to use that relationship to remind Beijing that Taiwan is still part of the region. Taiwan is an important partnership. And so I think investing in those relationships does help Taiwan, irrespective of the issue of diplomatic recognition. You know, I think the fact that you have advocates, friends, partners with Taiwan helps Taiwan's status, helps Taiwan's position in the world, expands that international space, you know, we sometimes talk about. And, you know, I think that is helpful and effective. And in the long term, really the best way to ensure that Taiwan has those relationships, unofficial as they may be, that they can rely upon if, you know, heaven forbid, there's a crisis or some type of contingency.
And Taiwan supported Tuvalu in building its first undersea cable in partnership with the U.S., Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. And the U.S. has also announced a number of new initiatives in the region recently and also hosted the investment summit.
That's right, in Hawaii last week with the Deputy Secretary of State, correct.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, what do you see as the U.S.'s overall strategy in the Pacific right now, and why do we see it kind of maybe ramping up its initiatives in the Pacific right now?
Well, you know, I think the Indo-Pacific, as we describe it, is one of those areas where we actually have bipartisan consensus in the United States, that it is the consequential region of the world. You know, there may not be a lot that Democrats and Republicans agree to on today, but the Indo-Pacific is one. And so I think there's consensus and bipartisan support for what we've been doing for years now in terms of prioritizing the U.S. relationship, working with partners in the region, and being very pragmatic about it. You mentioned a multinational minilateral group we've organized to assist Tuvalu access the global economy. We're also working on transportation links closely with Taiwan, with Australia and Japan, so that more people can travel more often and help connect these remote locations to the rest of the world. So we're being very functional, less political, more pragmatic.
So then has the U.S.'s interest in Pacific Island nations increased because of this competition with China and its growing influence?
I think the the argument is we only care about the Pacific Islands because of China. I think that's wrong. Point blank, blunt. You can do both. You can do both. You can care about the Pacific Islands and also care about what the PRC is up to in the Pacific Islands. So has the concern about the PRC heightened U.S. activity in the region? Of course. You wouldn't believe me if I said it wasn't related. But that said, we can still do many things and need to do many things in the Pacific that directly benefits the Pacific Islands, irrespective of the PRC. Yeah. And actually, I think the best way to ensure that the U.S. maintains a strong relationship and presence along with other countries in the Pacific Islands is to partner with Pacific Islands on the specific concerns that they care about. The environment, weather, pollution, maritime issues, health, capacity building.
I also wanted to ask kind of your specific experience. What specific kind of pressure did you see China putting on Palau when you were in office as ambassador?
Well, sure. I was there during an interesting period, obviously the pandemic and then elections. The president of Palau has been very public about the pressure he came under from the People's Republic of China during the elections. He's been very vocal about being offered the moon and the stars if he were to win an election and change recognition from Taipei to Beijing. I think he even had to change his phone because the PRC's ambassador, and remember there's no PRC ambassador in Palau, this was calling over from a neighboring country, would call him so often that he had to change his phone number and get a new phone. So it was incessant, constant pressure being put on an important leader. But yes, I was there 3 years or so and saw numerous examples of PRC pressure put on Palau's government, its officials, its business people, designed, I think, to lessen or try to divide the population in terms of our relationship between the United States and Palau, to try to, I think, convince some in Palau to push for a change of its diplomatic recognition, and generally to weaken, I think, the structures in Palau to make it less stable, less prosperous, which may then invite people to consider, well, things are not going so great here, maybe the PRC can help.
Do you think that there is a risk that Taiwan does lose another ally in the Pacific? And I guess if it does, how will it impact U.S. interests in the region?
I hate that, by the way, as a diplomat, how we boil things down into winning and losing. Yeah. I actually look at it slightly differently. And so I would anticipate, because of the PRC's pressure, Taiwan could lose other diplomatic allies in the Pacific and around the world. There's only 12 left. And that's why probably I would argue, not just in terms of trying to maintain the level of official diplomatic support that Taiwan has, focus on countries that want Taiwanese partnership, even if it's unofficial. I think that is a wise investment.
Do you think that the efforts that the U.S. is putting into Iran could impact its involvement in the Pacific Island?
It could. Yes, it could. But we've talked about the U.S. pivoting prior to the Pacific and then losing interest and focusing on another issue. And of course, the rest of the world gets a vote too. Ukraine has been a focus. Iran is today. Before that, Iraq and Afghanistan. The world has been turbulent. We've had world wars before that. So certainly, there are issues that require American engagement and attention. That said, I think, we mentioned earlier that there is still, and I predict there will be, bipartisan support for U.S. engagement in the Indo-Pacific. It's the consequential region. America is a Pacific country. I think we're always going to have an interest in the region, and I think it's in the Indo-Pacific's interests that the U.S. stays engaged. And for the moment, despite some of the political tensions in Washington, there continues to be strong bipartisan interest in the Indo-Pacific and concern about PRC behavior and activity in the region.